Episode 1. The Moan from the Old Crypt. The wind howled through the ancient, unforgiving oak trees of the small, desolate town of Havenwood, Maine. Here, everything was shrouded in antiquity and gloom. Ethan, a slender young man with thick glasses, stood before the rusty iron gates of Blackwood Cemetery. He wasn't there to mourn. He was there to uncover a legend. Moonlight illuminated hundreds of decaying headstones, but his target was a neglected section, cordoned off by old barbed wire and overgrown thickets. Ethan had heard the story from a banned local history book, the tale of Ilara, a beautiful young woman accused of witchcraft in 1789, merely for her ability to heal with herbs. Instead of being hanged, she was forced to endure being buried alive in a sturdy stone crypt, so her soul could never escape. Her grave had no name, no date, just a solitary slab of gray granite, hidden behind a lightning-struck pine tree. Ethan followed a crudely sketched map and found the stone slab. A sudden, unexpected chill hit him, even though it was a relatively warm summer night. He set up his gear, installing a voice recorder and an infrared camera near the stone. According to the lore, every full moon, Ilara would weep and mourn her unjust fate. He lay inside his small tent, tense and waiting. The clock struck midnight. The sound of the wind suddenly died away. The silence was so profound, it made Ethan's ears ring. Then, from deep beneath the earth, a sound began. It wasn't the wind, nor an animal, but a long, weak, yet deeply sorrowful moan. The sound didn't come from a fixed point. It seemed to weave through the soil, the stones, and seep into the very air. Hearing it for the first time, Ethan was shaken. He gripped his recorder, desperately trying to maintain composure. After that night, Ethan found no peace. He started seeing fleeting images whenever he closed his eyes. He saw a girl with long, dark, soaking wet hair, her wide amber eyes staring straight into him with boundless sorrow. She wore a tattered, old white dress. One night, in the most violent of his nightmares, Ethan found himself trapped in a cramped, dark space. The smell of damp earth and plaster filled his nostrils. He tried to scream, but couldn't. He saw Ilara's face, now no longer sad, but filled with fury and despair. She reached out a hand, her bony fingers touching his face, cold as ice. She whispered a phrase in an ancient language he didn't understand, but whose meaning was chillingly clear. "You will stay here too." Waking up, he found a long tear in his tent. Though there was no strong wind, the candle he had left outside was extinguished. Haunted by the dreams, Ethan decided to take the final step. He used a chisel and a small sledgehammer to pry open the heavy granite slab covering the crypt. It took him almost an hour to shift it just enough to peer down. A terrible stench, like rotting lilies and decayed earth, wafted up, assaulting his face. In the dim beam of his flashlight, he saw that the crypt was completely empty. No wooden coffin, no bones. Only a white linen dress was crumpled in one corner. It was the exact dress he had seen in his dream. Ethan used long tongs to pull the dress out. It was shockingly heavy. As he brought it into the light, he realized, horrified, that it wasn't stained with dirt, but was drenched and deeply stained with the dark red of a thick, viscous liquid, apparently dried blood. The blood had soaked every fiber of the fabric. Just then, the voice recorder automatically switched on. The sound that played was not the mournful moan from the previous night. This time, it was a high-pitched, cackling laugh, full of glee and madness. The laughter echoed throughout the cemetery. Ethan dropped the blood-soaked dress, stumbling backward. In a split second, the white dress on the ground began to tremble and slowly take shape into a human form. Amber eyes appeared in the shadows beneath the dress's cowl, staring intensely at Ethan. Illyra's voice, no longer a moan but a cold declaration, resonated in the air. "You found me. Now, you must stay here with me. Your blood will keep this dress warm." The granite slab's opening began to slowly close on its own, grinding like a curse. Ethan panicked, kicking desperately at the slab, but he couldn't stop it. The darkness in the crypt intensified, and the shadow of the white dress began to crawl up from the opening, extending blood-stained fingers toward him. Ethan's desperate scream as the granite slab finally slammed shut, burying him, along with Illyra's bloody secret, beneath the grounds of Blackwood. The voice recorder is still running, capturing only the sound of the howling wind and the echoing, triumphant cackling. Episode 2. The Killer's Summer House. The scene shifts to a remote Louisiana swamp. The air is hot, humid, carrying the scent of mud and rotting vegetation. The wooden house sits amidst tall cypress trees covered in moss, looking like an open wound in the wild landscape. This house once belonged to the Night Hunter, a notorious serial killer who vanished from police records 50 years ago after committing a series of gruesome murders. A group of 4 young friends from New Orleans, Mia, the one who booked the house, Jake, Mia's boyfriend, Chloe, the sensitive one, and Sam, the skeptic, rented the house for a suspiciously low price through a shady website, believing it would be an exciting summer horror experience. As soon as they stepped inside, they noticed the abnormalities. The house was dark and cold, despite the heat outside. There were deep, inexplicable claw marks on the window frames and wooden walls, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. A foul, yet strangely sweet and metallic odor lingered in the air. Sam, who dismissed everything, found an old shoebox under a bed. Inside were family photos taken in the 1960s, but all the faces were ripped off or punctured with a sharp object. Chloe felt particularly uneasy. She shivered constantly and insisted she heard whispering whenever she walked down the hallway. While Jake was attempting to fix a loose floorboard in the living room, he discovered a small leather-bound journal secured with a rusty padlock hidden beneath the floor. They had to use pliers to break the lock. The journal belonged to the Night Hunter. The first few pages were mundane, but they quickly transitioned into gruesome, detailed descriptions of the murders. He wrote about the flavor of fear and how he delighted in watching the light fade from his victim's eyes. Journal excerpt. Every prey has a distinct scent when they know death is coming. The odor of panic is the finest perfume in this forest. I keep a little bit of each one, so the scent never fades. The more they read, the more they felt a heavy pressure bearing down on them, as if an invisible person was standing right behind their shoulders, reading along. They decided to stop and hide the journal, but the seed of fear had been planted. That night, the nightmares began. Mia woke up to the sound of blood dripping onto the wooden floor. She switched on her flashlight, looking up at the ceiling. Nothing. But when she looked down, she saw a small, dark streak dripping onto the floor right where she lay. Then came the sound. The heavy, dragging footsteps in the attic. Not rats or wind, but the footsteps of a large man, Sam, the skeptic, mustered his courage, grabbed a stick, and headed up to the attic. He opened the door and shined the flashlight into the dark, cobweb-filled space. Nothing. But as he was about to turn away, a thin, long-fingered, black-nailed hand suddenly shot out from a dark corner, grabbing his ankle. Sam screamed, tumbling down the stairs. He swore he smelled an odor just like the one in the journal, a mix of human decay and rusted metal. The group desperately tried to escape the house. They quickly packed their bags, but their car keys were gone. They were forced to stay until morning. They huddled together in the living room, their backs against each other. Thick swamp fog shrouded the windows. The room began to grow chillingly cold. Chloe pointed to the window, where they saw a bloody handprint slowly smeared down the glass. Suddenly the room plunged into darkness. The electricity failed. In the absolute pitch black, Mia heard a close, sharp inhale right behind her, as if someone was smelling her hair. She froze. Jake flicked open his lighter. The faint flame illuminated the room. They saw a tall, inky black silhouette standing right in the middle of the room. The figure had no discernible face, but they could feel the bloodlust radiating from it. Jake threw the lighter at the figure. It passed right through it, but the lighter hit the wall, and a small old cabinet tumbled down, revealing a crudely carved section of the wooden wall. It was a name: the Night Hunter. The dark silhouette began to move, slowly and purposefully, advancing toward Mia. A hoarse, low chuckle echoed, not from the figure, but from all the walls around them, as if the house itself was laughing. Sam found a small pickaxe and lunged at the figure. The pickaxe passed through it like air, but the silhouette reacted with a terrifying hiss, and then vanished. The friends found their car keys tossed into a bucket of filthy water. They bolted outside, jumped into the car, and drove frantically, not daring to look back. As the car sped down the damp dirt road, the headlights shone. On the large oak tree right by the exit, they saw 4 of their own t-shirts carefully hung on the branches like trophies. The hoarse laughter echoed from the woods, following them until they were out of sight. The night hunter had never left the house. He was merely waiting for new guests to bring the scent of panic. Episode 3. The Curse of the Porcelain Doll. The setting is the antique and gloomy French Quarter of New Orleans. Mrs. Martha Dubois, a wealthy and eccentric antique collector, is attending a private auction. She is immediately captivated by a Victorian porcelain doll. The doll is the size of a real infant, dressed in a faded white lace gown. But the most unsettling feature is its sharp, hauntingly lifelike blue eyes, which seem to follow every movement in the room. The seller explains that the doll was found in the ruins of an orphanage that burned down in the early 20th century. Mrs. Martha, who doesn't believe in ghosts but believes in historical value, pays an exorbitant sum for it, convinced it is priceless. As soon as she brings the doll to her large mansion and places it in a glass display case, Mrs. Martha begins hearing small, subtle clicking sounds emanating from the antique room, like porcelain gently knocking together. She dismisses it as the temperature expansion of the room. Her beloved fluffy lapdog Bartholomew becomes unusually aggressive. He barks furiously at the display case, scratches at the exhibit room door, and refuses to enter the room. One morning, Mrs. Martha enters the room and finds the doll has changed its position. The previous night it was sitting upright. Now its head is tilted to one side, with one arm resting on its lap. She reassures herself that the maid must have accidentally nudged it, but the next day, the doll is facing completely away from the window, turned toward the wall. The phenomenon reaches its peak when Mrs. Martha is reading late at night. She glances toward the living room door, and she swears she saw the doll's blue eyes blink in the darkness. A wave of dread washes over her. She installs a security camera in the display room. The footage she captures is terrifying. At 3 a.m., the doll slowly turns its head to the left, then to the right, as if searching for something. Then it lifts one porcelain finger and slowly strokes the glass of the display case, producing the small, chilling, scratching sound Mrs. Martha had been hearing. Mrs. Martha researches the orphanage fire. She discovers the doll was named Caroline, and it belonged to an orphan girl who died in the blaze. The girl had no family, no loved ones, and her soul had inhabited the doll to search for the affection she was deprived of. Caroline didn't want to hurt Mrs. Martha. She only wanted a mother. Mrs. Martha decides she cannot keep it. She contacts the former seller and demands a return, but they refuse. She resolves to take it to the church herself for an exorcism. The moment Mrs. Martha reaches out to lift the doll from the case, an invisible, powerful force throws her backward. The glass display case shatters violently, sending sharp shards flying across the floor. The doll remains stationary on the floor. This time, it doesn't just stand. It lets out a piercing shriek, the cry of an angry and tormented child. Black, inky tears begin to stream from its blue eyes. As Mrs. Martha tries to crawl away, she sees the doll's small porcelain fingers begin to lengthen, becoming unnaturally sharp. They are no longer cute doll fingers, but resemble pointed claws. The doll begins to move, not walking but gliding over the broken glass, heading straight for Mrs. Martha. Its screaming cry grows louder and louder, escalating into a supernatural sound that shatters the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Mrs. Martha crawls into a corner, covering her face with her hands. She prays, but no miracle occurs. The doll stops directly in front of her. With its transformed porcelain hands, it grabs Mrs. Martha's silk nightgown and slowly climbs onto her. She feels its surprising weight, as heavy as a real child. Caroline's sharp porcelain fingers rise, aimed straight at Mrs. Martha's throat. The little girl's voice, now a tiny, cold, and vengeful whisper, sounds in her ear. Mommy will never leave Caroline again. Forever. Caroline the doll is sitting on the motionless chest of Mrs. Martha, her blue eyes staring blankly at the camera. The small, subtle clicking sound resumes. This time it is the sound of the doll's tiny grip, tightening around her neck. Episode 4. The Mirror That Reflected the Truth. The story takes place in a quiet coastal city in California. Mark Peterson is a successful businessman, but deep down, he is a man burdened by secrets and past mistakes. He is seeking redemption, or at least a way to confront his past. He finds what he is looking for in a dilapidated old church. Inside a rotten storage room lies a large, standing mirror with a dark, elaborately carved wooden frame, covered by an old canvas sheet. Legend holds that this mirror was used by a 19th century cleric to force penitents to confront the devil within themselves. The mirror doesn't reflect the current face, but the worst possible version of the person. Mark buys the mirror and takes it home, driven by a mixture of curiosity and a desire to challenge himself. When Mark removes the covering cloth, he looks into the mirror. The first moment is underwhelming. He sees his reflection, but it's slightly blurred and distorted, looking sicker and more stressed than usual. He dismisses it as a trick. However, a few days later, when he looks again, the reflection has changed. He sees himself smiling, a wide, vicious, and cold grin that is nothing like his own. The more he stares, the more unsettled he feels. Then, The mirror begins to reflect things Mark has kept buried. The first time he looks in after a stressful phone call, the reflection shows Mark angrily throwing the phone against the wall. A violent action he almost did, but managed to restrain. The mirror goes further. It reflects not just negative thoughts, but the sinful actions Mark has actually committed in the past. One night, he looks in and sees the reflection of a younger Mark embezzling money from a charity fund, a secret he's successfully covered up. The detail is so vivid, he can hear the rustling paper and the clicking keyboard. The haunting escalates. He sees his reflection in a vicious argument with his ex-wife, uttering cruel words that caused her pain. He sees himself driving away after a minor hit-and-run accident without taking responsibility. These aren't just images. They are loops of regret and fear, replayed vividly and in detail. Mark desperately tries to smash the mirror, but whenever he raises his hand, his reflection in the mirror also raises its hand and shakes its head with a challenging smirk. On a waning crescent moon night, Mark's fear reaches its peak. He stands opposite the mirror, struggling to control his panic. The reflection is no longer Mark, but a demonic, utterly distorted version of himself. It has bloodshot eyes, sharp teeth, and a blood-soaked white shirt. The entity in the mirror slowly lifts a kitchen knife, its cold blade glinting under the light. The entity looks at Mark, then at the knife, and laughs maniacally. Mark recoils, clutching his chest. Just then, the entity in the mirror raises the knife high and plunges it violently into its own reflection, the mirror. The shattering sound of glass echoes throughout the house. The shards don't fall. Instead, they dissolve into the air like black smoke. The black smoke quickly dissipates, and where the mirror once stood, there is now an empty space. But a physical figure, tall, wearing the blood-stained shirt, is standing there. It is Mark, but the mirror Mark, the physical embodiment of all his repressed guilt, sin, and insanity. The demon looks at the real Mark with its red eyes, then down at the kitchen knife still in its hand. The entity speaks, its voice hoarse and low, the exact voice of Mark, but with a chilling cruelty. You tried to bury me for too long. Now I am free, and only one Mark is allowed to exist. The entity lunges. Mark screams in terror and runs, the real Mark being relentlessly hunted by the false Mark, the personification of his own sins, within his own home. The final screams are replaced by the sound of frantic footsteps and the cold, sharp sound of the knife tearing through the air. Episode 5. The Tunnel with No Escape. The setting is the cold winter city of Chicago. A construction crew is excavating to expand the current subway line when they accidentally uncover an old, forgotten streetcar tunnel dating back to the 1920s. The entrance had been sealed off with bricks and cement. The exploration team consists of 4 men, led by Javier, an experienced, weathered construction worker of Mexican descent, who also harbors a belief in the paranormal. They are sent down to assess the tunnel's condition. Urban legend holds that on a stormy night in 1927, a train full of passengers derailed in this tunnel. Due to the chaos and poor record-keeping, dozens of people were entombed and left behind underground when the tunnel was sealed. As Javier and his team venture deeper, the air becomes damp, heavy, carrying the scent of mildew and rusted metal. They see old, overturned streetcars, covered in dust and cobwebs. The strange phenomena begin. Their flashlights constantly flicker and go out inexplicably. They start hearing unidentifiable sounds, muffled screams, the clash of metal, and occasionally a long, drawn-out train whistle echoing from an unknown distance. Javier checks his thermometer and notices the temperature drops abruptly to near freezing at certain points. Then they smell a terrifying odor, burnt metal and blood, a scent even Javier had never encountered before. As the group rounds a bend, A loud crash echoes, and a section of the tunnel ceiling collapses, splitting the team in two. Javier is trapped alone on the other side. Javier is now completely isolated. His flashlight beam illuminates a horrifying scene. Faint, translucent figures begin to appear. They are the trapped passengers. They wear outdated 1920s clothing, their faces full of fear and blood. They are not typical ghosts. They don't attack Javier. They simply run, wildly, panicked, screaming towards a solid rock wall. Their actions are a non-stop loop of the moment of the terrible accident. Javier sees a woman constantly wailing her child's name, and a man futilely trying to open a jammed door. Javier realizes he is caught in the time loop of the 1927 accident. As he tries to find a way out, the train whistle sounds again, but this time it is louder, sharper, and seems to be approaching. The terrifying sound of metal grinding against metal begins to shake the entire tunnel. Javier looks down the tracks. An old, pitch-black locomotive with dim headlights is speeding toward him. There's no engine sound, no mechanics, just deadly silence and terrifying speed. He manages to squeeze himself into a small wall niche just as the ghost train whizzes past. As it passes, he sees through the dusty windows hundreds of distorted faces, staring out. They are no longer faint silhouettes. They are trapped souls. Javier realizes he is not just an observer. He is standing right on the tracks of the accident. If he doesn't escape, he will become the newest passenger on this perpetual ghost train. Javier runs frantically toward the makeshift exit his team had created. He hears heavy breathing, not his own, but the sound of hundreds of people gasping as they are entombed in the darkness. He sees the passenger silhouettes begin to merge, forming a giant black mass that follows him. They don't want him to escape. They want him to join their silence and their fear. When he reaches the collapse site, he sees his colleagues desperately trying to dig through the rubble. He pounds on the rock, screaming for help. Just then, he hears the train whistle sound for the third time, right behind him. This time, it's not just a sound. It is the blistering heat of an oncoming locomotive. Javier screams, hammering harder. His colleagues finally manage to create a small opening. A faint flashlight beam from the outside shines in. Javier reaches out his hand, and at that very moment, the ghost train slams into his position. The screen cuts to black. Only the horrific sound of crashing metal, the echoing screams, and then absolute silence remains. When the screen lights up again, Javier's colleagues see only an empty space and debris. There is no sign of Javier, but on the damp ground, a single hard hat covered in clay and rust lies right on the tracks. Episode 6. The Lake That Swallowed Memories. The setting shifts to the remote and beautiful mountains of Oregon, home to Serpent Lake. The lake possesses a captivating beauty, but hides a dark history. Numerous swimmers and fishermen have vanished mysteriously, without a trace. Local legends whisper of an ancient water entity that doesn't kill people, but instead steals the identity and memories of its victims. Sarah and Lisa are sisters. Sarah is a practical psychology student, while Lisa is a sensitive artist, obsessed with the lake's lore. They decide to camp near Serpent Lake for a vacation, and for Lisa to complete a painting of the scenery. From the very first day, Lisa is strangely drawn to the water. She spends hours sitting by the shore, staring into the dark, deep surface. Sarah feels uneasy when Lisa mentions that she feels as though the lake is calling her name. The next day, the sisters decide to swim. The lake water is unusually cold. While swimming far from the shore, Lisa suddenly feels a cold jolt shoot through her, as if a cold electric current is running through her body. She frantically swims back to shore in a panic. When she reaches the bank, Lisa slumps onto the sand, shivering. Sarah asks if she's okay, but Lisa only looks at her with a completely blank gaze. Sarah realizes the horror. Lisa can't remember anything. She doesn't know who Sarah is, who she herself is, or why they are there. Serpent Lake has swallowed Lisa's memories. Lisa becomes detached, acting like a lost child. She isn't afraid of the lake. She is even more strongly attracted to it. She continuously tries to walk toward the water. Sarah, the psychology student, tries every technique to trigger her sister's memory. She shows Lisa family photos, talks about shared memories, but all is futile. Lisa only repeats blankly, "That's not me." Who am I? As Sarah tries harder to bring Lisa back, she begins to feel an invisible pull from the lake. She starts getting severe headaches, and her own memories begin to fade. She tries to recall her mother's name, but there is only a blank space. That night, Sarah hears whispering coming from the surface of the lake. It's not the wind, but a deep, low sound, like the groan of stone and water. The voice calls her name. Sarah, surrender, let it be mine. She glances out of the tent door and sees Lisa standing at the water's edge, facing the lake, slowly undressing as if preparing to swim. She doesn't look scared or cold. Her face shows a strange serenity. Sarah rushes out, grabs Lisa's arm and pulls her back. Lisa struggles violently, with surprising strength. In the midst of the struggle, Lisa looks at Sarah with empty eyes and says something that sends shivers down Sarah's spine. "Who are you? What are you keeping from me?" Sarah realizes Lisa didn't just lose her memory. She perceived Sarah's memories as something she needed to take back to fill her own void. The two sisters wrestle right at the water's edge. The pull from the lake intensifies, drawing not only Lisa but Sarah as well. Sarah sees images of her childhood, her parents, her pet dog, all being physically sucked out of her mind, flying toward the lake surface like faint, shimmering specks of light. Finally, Sarah grabs a necklace from Lisa's neck, one Lisa had worn since childhood. She screams Lisa's name and throws the necklace into the lake. The water surges with a massive, dark, and furious wave, as if the entity is enraged. The moan of the underwater entity turns into a ghastly roar. At the same moment, Lisa convulses violently, and her eyes return to their original, fearful expression. But now, she remembers none of what just happened. Sarah, exhausted and barely remembering who she is, clutches her sister and runs for her life. As they climb into the car and speed away, Sarah glances in the rearview mirror. Serpent Lake is calm again, but on the surface, a faint dark silhouette is slowly rising, clutching Lisa's necklace and watching them leave. Sarah realizes she saved her sister, but a piece of both of their memories will forever remain in Serpent Lake. She can no longer recall her mother's face. Episode 7. The Mailman's Revenge. The setting is Jericho Creek, an old rural town where gossip and contempt for others are daily habits. Mr. Howard Blight, the town's mailman for 40 years, was a gentle, quiet man who was poorly treated by the villagers. They mocked his old bicycle and tattered leather bag, constantly complaining about his slowness and absent-mindedness. Mr. Howard died alone in his dilapidated house one winter night. The villagers breathed a sigh of relief, happy to have a new mail carrier. He was buried in a secluded corner of the cemetery, along with his leather bag and rusty bicycle, per his final wishes. 1 year after Mr. Howard's death, strange things began to happen. The residents who were the most malicious towards Mr. Howard started receiving letters with no stamps, no postmark, and no return address. Mrs. Elsie, the most frequent complainer, was the first to receive one. The letter was tucked directly into her locked mailbox. Inside the envelope was no writing, just a blank piece of paper stained with dry mud streaks and a foul, damp odor of mildew. Immediately after receiving the letter, Her proud rose garden was destroyed by a strange blight overnight. Mr. George, who had once blamed Mr. Howard for losing an important letter, received the second delivery. This time, inside was an old, rusty uniform button, identical to a button from Mr. Howard's worn-out uniform. The next day, his barn door spontaneously collapsed, killing his prized cow. The town grew uneasy. Everyone knew where these deliveries were coming from. When a letter was sent to Mayor Simmons, who had refused to grant Mr. Howard a retirement pension, the horror intensified. Inside Mayor Simmons' letter, there was a lock of dry, white hair tied with a black thread. The mayor, a tough man, became frantic. That very night, he heard his doorbell ring. When he opened it, no one was there, but on the doormat was a pile of damp soil forming the shape of a bicycle tire track. Danny, a 12-year-old boy who used to throw rocks at Mr. Howard's bicycle, received the fourth letter. His mother tried to throw it away, but the letter kept reappearing on his pillow. Finally, Danny secretly opened the letter in his bedroom. Inside, there was no mud or button, but a large, yellowed adult molar tooth. Immediately, Danny felt a terrible, sudden chill run down his spine. He heard the clinking sound of a bicycle bell outside his window. He looked out and saw a tall, thin figure in a tattered mailman's uniform standing under the dim street lamp. It was Mr. Howard. His face was pale, his eyes empty and devoid of emotion. Mr. Howard was not riding the bike. The old bicycle stood next to him, and the bell was ringing on its own, frantically. Mr. Howard turned his head and looked directly into Danny's window. He raised his tattered leather bag, and Danny saw that the bag was filled with rotting letters that seemed to be oozing a dark brown liquid. He began to move. Not walking, he floated across the ground, gliding straight toward Danny's bedroom window. The bicycle bell grew louder and louder, drowning out the wind. Danny screamed and covered his ears. He watched as Mr. Howard raised a thin, skeletal arm. Instead of delivering mail, his fingers began to distort, lengthening and curling, like sharp, folded envelope edges. The arm passed through the window glass effortlessly, without a sound. The long, sharp fingers headed straight for the boy's neck. Danny's mother rushing into the room, only to find the window closed and intact. Danny lies motionless on the floor, his hand still clutching the yellowed molar. Resting on his chest is a blank letter carefully placed. The letter is heavy, and when his mother tries to lift it, she sees a rectangular burn mark on his shirt underneath. The mailman has completed his final delivery. Episode 8. The Screaming Cornfield. The setting is the vast plains of Kansas, where cornfields stretch out to the horizon. The story focuses on the Raven Field, a massive cornfield enclosed by old barbed wire fencing and a faded warning sign. No trespassing. Lethal danger. Local legend claims that in the 1930s, a farming family was brutally murdered and buried in this field after a savage land dispute. Their souls were trapped, and their anguish soaked into the earth, turning the corn stalks into their eyes, ears, and voice. Dr. Ilara Vance and Ben, her assistant, are two paranormal investigators from the city. They are equipped with electromagnetic field, EMF meters, and advanced voice recorders. They arrive on a night of dense fog to search for electronic voice phenomena, EVP. As soon as they cut the barbed wire and step inside, the fog thickens so much they can barely see each other a few feet away. They are immediately lost in the towering, lush, and seemingly endless corn maze. The first sound they record is not a voice, but a small clattering sound of corn stalks hitting each other, caused not by the wind, but by the movement of an invisible presence. Going deeper, they begin to hear faint whispers mixed with the sound of the wind. Dr. Vance uses the voice recorder to filter the noise, and they clearly hear, "Cold, so cold," and "Help me find my child." Ben checks the EMF meter. The needle spikes to its highest level right next to a cornstalk, then abruptly drops back to 0. The true horror begins when they try to find their way back. They spot a short, clear path leading back toward the direction they came from, but as they rush toward it, the path snaps shut. The dense cornstalks have leaned into each other, forming an impenetrable green wall. They realize the cornstalks are not just a hiding place for spirits. They are the spirits. The feeling of being watched intensifies. They start seeing faint silhouettes fleeing through the rows. Not clear shapes, just fast, frantic movements. These are the spectral images of the victims trying to escape the massacre decades ago. The whispers have now turned into horrifying, agonizing screams emanating from all directions around them, as if thousands of cornstalks are screaming in unison. Dr. Vance panics and runs, separating from Ben. She sees a dilapidated wooden shack suddenly appear in the middle of the field. She rushes inside, hoping to find shelter. Inside the shack there is no furniture, only dried bloodstains on the floor, and an old shovel leaning against the wall. She looks out the window and sees Ben standing right outside, but he can't get in. She yells at Ben, but her voice is swallowed by the screams from the field. Ben looks at her with absolute terror, not because she's trapped, but because something is standing right behind her. Just then, Dr. Vance feels a violent tug from behind. She turns and sees that the cornstalks have grown through the wooden walls of the shack, their sharp leaves starting to wrap around her arms. Dr. Vance screams as she is violently pulled out of the crumbling shack by the cornstalks. She sees the corn leaves turn razor sharp, slicing into her flesh. She catches a final glimpse of Ben's horrified eyes before the cornfield completely closes in around her, forming a colossal green prison, suffocating her. Ben desperately runs toward the spot, but he can't break through. He hears the sound of breaking bones, Dr. Vance's final whimper, and then a heavy, dull thump as the last cornstalk seals shut. He stands there, utterly helpless. The screams from the cornfield are no longer screams of pain. They are dry, rustling, contented cackles coming from everywhere. As Ben turns to flee, he sees a horrifying sight. A cornstalk directly in front of him has sprouted an ear of blood-red corn. Ben running out of the field. He looks back, and the cornfield seems to gently sway, as if it has just fed well and is now digesting its newest victim. He carries no equipment or device, only silence and absolute dread. Episode 9. The Call from the Other Side. The setting is an emergency 911 call center late at night in Seattle, Washington. Chloe, the night shift operator, is a dedicated young woman struggling with post-traumatic stress after failing to save a stroke victim over the phone months ago. The calls begin at 2 a.m. Chloe's desk phone rings with a strange number displaying unknown number. She answers, and on the other end is a hoarse, weak voice of an elderly woman, sobbing in terror. The voice, "Please, you have to help me. I'm alone in the house. There's something. It's watching me through the window." Chloe tries to calm the woman, asking for her address. But when she searches the information, The system reports that the address is abandoned, and the woman, named Eleanor Vance, was reported as deceased 1 year ago in a suicide. Chloe hangs up, shaken. She checks the old records and confirms. Eleanor Vance called 911 15 times on the night she died, each call fragmented and filled with panic about something watching her. But 10 minutes later, Chloe's phone rings again. The same number, the same hoarse voice, repeating the exact plea for help from before. The voice, "Please, you have to help me. I'm alone in the house. There's something. It's watching me through the window." Chloe realizes she is trapped in Eleanor Vance's loop of despair. She cannot help this dead woman. She tries to change the script, asking different questions, but the voice only repeats its hopeless pleas. This continues throughout her shift. Every 10 minutes, the phone rings. Chloe's colleagues hear nothing, only watching her repeatedly pick up the phone and speak to thin air. Obsessed, Chloe uses the old records to find the address of the house. She decides to go there after her shift ends. The small wooden house is in the suburbs, old and covered in moss. The windows are cracked and taped with old masking tape. When Chloe steps inside, she feels a terrible coldness. Everything is preserved, as if Eleanor Vance had just left, but covered in thick dust. She finds an old landline phone, the receiver resting loosely off the hook. She walks to the window, where Eleanor said something was looking in. She looks out, and there is nothing. Just then, Chloe's cell phone in her pocket rings. She pulls out the phone. The caller ID displays unknown number, the very same number that had been calling her all night. Chloe hesitates, but curiosity and dread win out. She presses the answer button. Eleanor Vance's hoarse, weak voice comes through the speaker, but this time it is no longer a plea for help. The voice carries a ghastly satisfaction. "You came. I knew you would come." Chloe asks who she is and what she wants. The voice replies, deeper and lower, no longer a wail, but a chilling declaration. "I am what you could not save." Then the voice changes. It is no longer Eleanor Vance. It is a low, terrifying male voice whispering through the phone. "Chloe, you always wanted to know who I was, didn't you? I am what Eleanor saw. And now, you are here with me too." Chloe turns around in utter terror. In the corner of the room, where Eleanor Vance ended her life a year ago, she sees a tall, dark silhouette standing there. The figure has no discernible face, only dark red glowing eyes. The figure does not move, but its presence freezes the room to the bone. Chloe screams, dropping her cell phone. The phone rolls across the floor, and through the speaker, the hoarse, low laughter continues to echo. Chloe desperately runs toward the door, but feels as if an invisible, heavy force is pressing down on her. The dark silhouette raises an arm, and on the wall behind it, Chloe sees an inscription appear, written in old black blood. "Chloe Vance, suicide victim, 2:15 a.m. next year." Chloe collapsing onto the floor, gasping for air. The 911 phone in her handbag, even without a SIM card, begins to ring with that same cursed, unknown number. This time the caller is herself, Chloe, desperately screaming for help, trapped in the time loop of horror that she can never escape. Episode 10. The Perpetual Loop. The setting is St. Jude's Asylum, an old, isolated facility nestled deep in the New England woods. Dr. Alan Thorne was a brilliant psychological analyst, once famous for writing books that debunked all ghost stories and supernatural phenomena as products of mass hysteria and the denial of personal guilt. Currently, Dr. Allen is the patient. He is accused of fabricating evidence in a murder case, but he insists what he saw was real. vengeful spirits committing the murders. He is locked in a private cell, where he believes he is being monitored by an invisible force. Alan's nightmare begins with uninvited visitors. First is the wailing moan from beneath the floorboards, identical to Alara's moan. Episode 1. Alan stares down at the wooden floor and sees a streak of black blood starting to seep out, oozing through the cracks. Then, he sees a blood-stained shirt, Episode 4, hanging suspended in the corner of the room. The shirt spontaneously twitches, and he hears the maniacal laughter of his own voice, whispering his darkest secrets. Most horrifyingly, he sees the tall, inky black silhouette, Episode 2, standing right at his cell door, constantly sniffing the air, searching for the scent of panic. Alan realizes that all the fears he once tried to dismiss in his books are manifesting in this room. Alan desperately tries to find a way out, believing he must leave to stop these spirits. He finds an old leather-bound notebook hidden beneath his mattress. It is not his diary. It is a detailed log of every paranormal case he ever wrote a book to debunk. He flips to the final page. It is an analysis written about the haunting of Dr. Alan Thorne, detailing how he fabricated supernatural phenomena to cover up the fact that he had used his patients as test subjects in unethical psychological experiments. Directly beneath that heading, written in dark red ink, is a list of his victims. The list includes Eleanor Vance, Episode 9, Pushed to the Limit; the Blackwood Farmers, Episode 8, Buried in the Earth; and finally, a name that freezes him in terror, Alan Thorne. Alan rushes to the dull metallic mirror on the wall. He scratches away the layer of grime and looks in. The reflection is not Dr. Alan Thorne in a patient's gown. It is Alan Thorne in a doctor's white coat, his face arrogant and cruel. The reflection smiles and says, "I told you, only one Alan is allowed to exist." The real Alan, in the patient gown, realizes the terrifying truth. He was never the great Dr. Alan Thorne trying to escape madness. He has always been the patient, trapped here. The horror stories in this series, The Witch's Moan, The Night Hunter, The Doll's Curse, The Mirror, and The Tunnel, were not separate ghost stories. They are fragments of the collective guilt that Dr. Alan inflicted upon his victims during his psychological experiments. The spirits, all of them, fully materialize in the room. Alara's white dress, Caroline the doll, Episode 3, crawling across the floor, and the Night Hunter, Episode 2, standing in the corner. They do not attack. They simply gather around Alan in silence, reenacting their pain. Alan screams, desperately begging for forgiveness. The reflection of Dr. Alan in the mirror reaches out, touches the glass, and whispers, "Quiet, Alan. You need your rest. Your eternal punishment is to forever relive the fear of the very people you broke." Then, a heavy door swings open. A nurse walks in, her face emotionless. She looks right past Alan, not seeing him. She goes to the bed and gently pulls the blanket over an unmoving figure lying on the mattress. The figure is Alan Thorne, but he has been heavily sedated, or perhaps has died from fear. The nurse looks into the security camera and whispers into the monitoring device. Patient Alan Thorne is resting. The security camera view of the room slowly pans. Dr. Alan Thorne, the panicked spirit/ego, is still kneeling in the middle of the room, screaming at the mirror. But in the corner of the room, on a small table, a brand new leather-bound notebook has appeared. The title on the cover reads, "The Haunting of Dr. Alan Thorne." The episode and the series conclude with the image of the notebook. The loop has begun again. Alan will forever be a victim of the very horror stories he created.